When humanity first entered the Galactic Council, nobody expected much from them. The galaxy had already been shaped by civilizations thousands of years older than Earth. Some species had mastered faster-than-light travel before humans had invented electricity. Others commanded economies spanning entire sectors and possessed fleets so vast that their shipyards could be seen from orbit. Compared to them, humanity appeared ordinary. Their territory was limited. Their technology was respectable, but not revolutionary. Their military ranked somewhere in the middle of known powers. They weren't feared, and they certainly weren't considered influential. Many council members assumed humans would spend the next few centuries struggling to catch up. Instead, humanity did something none of the established powers expected. They listened. Before making demands, they studied. Before claiming territory, they negotiated. Before building alliances, they learned how other civilizations thought, traded, and governed themselves. While other species competed for influence, humans focused on relationships. It was a strategy so unusual that many aliens initially mistook it for weakness. When border disputes threatened trade routes, human mediators volunteered to help. When rival governments refused to communicate, human diplomats carried messages between them. When natural disasters devastated distant colonies, relief vessels bearing Earth's insignia often arrived before local governments could organize a response. Humans gained a reputation few species had ever earned. They became known as the negotiators. The title wasn't official, but it spread across the stars anyway. If two governments needed a neutral voice, they called humans. If a ceasefire needed monitoring, they called humans. If a fragile agreement needed someone trusted by both sides, they called humans. Over time, humanity became involved in countless agreements, partnerships, and development projects throughout known space. What made this remarkable wasn't their authority. It was their willingness. Humans rarely demanded payment equal to the effort they invested. They believed stability benefited everyone. A peaceful galaxy created opportunities for trade, exploration, and growth. At least that was the theory. Unfortunately, not everyone shared that perspective. Several major powers began taking human cooperation for granted. Requests for assistance increased. Reciprocity decreased. When humans proposed infrastructure projects, council committees delayed approval for years. When they offered economic partnerships, negotiations were repeatedly postponed. When they raised concerns regarding piracy, border security, or resource distribution, their warnings were buried beneath endless procedural reviews. The pattern repeated so often that it became predictable. Human representatives would identify a problem. The council would acknowledge it. Nothing would happen. Then, when the situation eventually deteriorated, humanity would be expected to help solve it. And they usually did. Not because they were obligated, because millions of innocent lives often depended on it. This cycle continued for decades, then centuries. Many younger civilizations admired humanity for their patience. Some even modeled portions of their own governments after human diplomatic systems. But among the dominant powers, respect remained surprisingly rare. Human cooperation was viewed as a permanent resource. Reliable, predictable, unlimited. The possibility that it could disappear never seriously entered anyone's calculations. That assumption became deeply embedded within galactic politics. Every concession made by humans encouraged demands for another. Every compromise convinced certain leaders that more could be extracted. Yet throughout all of it, human diplomats maintained a remarkably consistent position. At conferences, summits, and council sessions, their message never changed. Cooperation requires mutual respect. The statement was delivered calmly, repeatedly, patiently, year after year. Few listened. Many believed humanity needed the council more than the council needed humanity. After all, the major powers possessed larger fleets, larger economies, and older civilizations. From their perspective, Earth had little leverage. What they failed to recognize was that influence and dependence are not the same thing. By helping others for generations, humanity had quietly woven itself into the foundation of galactic civilization. Not through conquest, not through intimidation, through trust. A resource far more valuable than most leaders understood. As tensions across several disputed regions intensified, the Council announced what many hoped would become the most important diplomatic gathering in modern history. Representatives from every major power would attend. Dozens of long-standing conflicts would be addressed. Trade disagreements, territorial disputes, security concerns, and political grievances would finally be negotiated in a single summit. The responsibility for organizing much of the framework fell, unsurprisingly, to humanity. For months, human diplomats worked alongside countless governments preparing proposals designed to satisfy all sides. By every measure, the summit represented their greatest diplomatic effort. When the day finally arrived, delegates from across the galaxy gathered within the Council's central chamber. Then the human delegation entered. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but experienced observers immediately noticed something unsettling. The humans who arrived were different. There were no journalists accompanying them, no public relations teams, no ceremonial greetings, no casual conversations with old allies. Most disturbing of all, there were no smiles. The delegation moved with quiet purpose, took their seats, and began reviewing their files. For the first time in centuries, humanity looked less like negotiators and more like people reaching the end of their patience. Very few delegates understood the significance of that change. Soon, they would. The summit opened with expectations unlike any gathering in recent memory. Across the galaxy, governments had pinned their hopes on this meeting. Several border conflicts had reached dangerous levels. Resource shortages were creating tension between neighboring powers. Trade routes crossing disputed territories faced increasing disruptions. One mistake, one misunderstanding, or one reckless decision could trigger conflicts affecting billions. Human diplomats had spent years preparing for this moment. Every proposal presented before the Council had been built through thousands of negotiations, countless revisions, and careful compromises. Experts from Earth had consulted economists, military analysts, engineers, and political leaders from dozens of civilizations. Nothing had been rushed. Nothing had been improvised. Humanity arrived with solutions designed to give every side something valuable while asking each participant to make reasonable concessions. The first proposal focused on trade. Human analysts suggested creating protected commercial corridors through contested sectors. Shared oversight would prevent any single government from dominating traffic while guaranteeing access for all participating worlds. Several smaller species immediately expressed support. The larger powers did not. One delegate dismissed the proposal within minutes. Another claimed the arrangement favored weaker governments. A third argued that his civilization deserved exclusive control due to historical claims dating back centuries. The discussion ended without progress. The second proposal addressed resource distribution. Human planners recommended cooperative extraction agreements in disputed systems. Revenue would be divided proportionally, reducing incentives for territorial conflict. Again, objections arrived almost immediately, not because the plan was flawed, because compromise itself had become unacceptable. Several influential governments wanted complete control, not shared responsibility. The pattern continued throughout the summit. Every human proposal encountered resistance. Every attempt at balance was treated as a weakness to exploit. Every concession humanity offered encouraged demands for additional concessions. The delegates from Earth remained professional. They listened. They took notes. They asked questions. Yet behind their calm expressions lay years of accumulated frustration. This wasn't the first summit. It wasn't even the 10th. For decades, humanity had invested enormous effort into maintaining stability while watching powerful governments undermine that stability whenever it became politically convenient. Piracy warnings had been ignored. Security recommendations had been delayed. Infrastructure investments had been blocked. Joint defense initiatives had been rejected. Then, whenever predictable crises emerged, the same governments demanded immediate human assistance. The summit became another example of the same behavior. As negotiations entered their final phase, the atmosphere shifted. The major powers stopped pretending they wanted compromise. Instead, they began presenting demands. One government insisted human patrol fleets withdraw from key trade regions. Another demanded new restrictions on human commercial operations. A coalition of influential species proposed transferring oversight of several strategic development projects away from Earth entirely. The official explanations varied. The intent did not. Each demand reduced human influence while increasing the authority of governments that had contributed far less to maintaining galactic stability. Even some neutral observers became uncomfortable. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. Human representatives had spent years building the framework supporting these regions. Now others wanted ownership without responsibility, contribution without sacrifice, authority without effort. Still, the delegation from Earth remained silent. Then came the final proposal. A senior council leader rose before the assembly and presented a comprehensive restructuring package. Under the new arrangement, human security forces would withdraw from numerous sectors. Economic privileges earned through decades of investment would be redistributed. Administrative authority over several successful human-led programs would transfer to council supervision. In exchange, humanity would receive promises, future reviews, future discussions, future considerations. Nothing concrete, nothing enforceable, nothing remotely equal to what was being surrendered. For the first time since negotiations began, complete silence settled across the chamber. Even delegates who disliked humanity understood what they were witnessing. This was no longer diplomacy. This was exploitation wrapped in procedural language. The lead human ambassador reviewed the proposal without visible emotion. The document rested on the table for several moments. Then the ambassador looked toward the council leadership.
His voice was calm,
steady, almost quiet. Is this your final position? The question echoed through the chamber. Council officials exchanged brief glances. Many seemed surprised the humans had asked at all. The answer came quickly. A formal vote was called. One by one, representatives cast their decisions. The majority supported the proposal. When the results appeared, the outcome was unmistakable. The council had chosen its position. No amendments, no negotiations, no revisions. Final. The human ambassador studied the display for several seconds. Then he nodded once. No anger, no argument, no warning. He simply closed the file in front of him. Around him, the rest of the human delegation did the same. Papers were organized. Data tablets were secured. Chairs moved quietly as the representative stood. Confusion spread throughout the chamber. Several delegates expected a speech. Others anticipated outrage. Some waited for threats. Nothing came. The humans gathered their materials and began walking toward the exit. A council official called after them. No response. Another demanded clarification. Still nothing. The delegation continued forward without hesitation. Moments later, the doors closed behind them. The chamber remained silent. Then laughter began. Some delegates celebrated openly. Others joked that humanity had finally accepted reality. A few congratulated themselves for forcing Earth's representatives into submission. They believed the humans would return. They always returned. That was what humans did. Only one individual wasn't laughing. At the far end of the chamber sat an elderly representative whose species had participated in galactic politics for thousands of years. Unlike the others, he wasn't watching the doors. He was staring at the final vote tally. His expression had turned pale. Slowly, he leaned back in his seat. For the first time in decades, genuine fear entered his eyes. Because he had just realized something the others had missed. Humanity hadn't stormed out. Humanity hadn't been defeated. Humanity had finished listening. Continuing directly from Section 2. For several days after the summit, most council members treated the human departure as a temporary protest. The assumption seemed reasonable. Humanity had spent centuries solving problems, mediating disputes, and maintaining relationships that other governments often neglected. Many leaders convinced themselves that the humans would eventually return once emotions cooled. They were wrong. The first indication appeared in diplomatic channels. Requests sent to Earth remained unanswered. Follow-up communications received polite acknowledgments, but no commitments. Meetings previously scheduled months in advance were quietly canceled. Joint committees found themselves operating without human representatives for the first time in living memory. At first, these developments caused little concern. The council had thousands of officials. Work continued. Or so everyone believed. Then trade analysts noticed something unusual. Freight traffic moving through several major corridors had declined sharply. Not enough to trigger alarm, but enough to attract attention. Investigators searched for explanations. Piracy rates were stable. Navigation systems were functioning normally. No natural disasters had disrupted shipping. Yet cargo volumes continued falling. A deeper examination revealed the source. Human-operated logistics companies had begun withdrawing assets from non-essential routes. Entire transport networks were being reorganized. Cargo vessels that once serviced dozens of council sectors were suddenly redirecting toward exclusively human-controlled infrastructure. The reports reached economic oversight agencies within weeks. Concern followed shortly afterward. Human shipping organizations were larger than many officials realized. Over generations, Earth had built reliable transportation systems connecting distant regions of known space. Businesses preferred them because deliveries arrived on time. Governments relied on them because emergencies could be handled quickly. Most leaders had never considered what would happen if those services disappeared. Now they were finding out. The situation became more troubling when agricultural exports began changing. Several worlds depended heavily on food imported from human-developed farming networks. These arrangements had existed for decades and were viewed as permanent features of the galactic economy. Suddenly, contract renewals stopped. Supplies remained available, but priorities shifted toward human territories and long-standing partner systems. Prices increased across multiple sectors. Shortages emerged in locations that had grown comfortable depending on resources they did not produce themselves. Council officials demanded explanations. Human trade authorities responded with a simple statement. Earth was reviewing all international commitments. Nothing more, nothing less. The message offered no threats. That made it far more unsettling. As investigations expanded, intelligence agencies uncovered a reality few had fully understood. Humanity wasn't merely participating in galactic infrastructure. Humanity was supporting enormous portions of it. Communication relays in remote sectors, emergency response fleets, disaster recovery programs, medical transport networks, engineering support teams. The deeper analysts looked, the larger the pattern became. For centuries, humans had quietly accepted responsibilities others avoided because those responsibilities were expensive, difficult, and rarely profitable. While rival powers competed for prestige projects and political influence, humanity had focused on practical systems that kept civilization functioning. Most governments never noticed because those systems worked so efficiently. Now they were noticing. A confidential report delivered to council leadership produced widespread disbelief. The document concluded that humanity operated the largest logistics network in known space. Additional investigations verified the finding. Then came another revelation. Human organizations coordinated more humanitarian missions than any other civilization. Another report showed human corporations maintained critical infrastructure across hundreds of independent systems. Each discovery raised the same question. How had nobody realized this sooner? The answer was uncomfortable, because humans never demanded recognition. They performed the work, solved the problems, and moved on. The benefits became so routine that the galaxy stopped seeing them. As weeks passed, the consequences spread. Construction projects stalled due to missing materials. Colonies experienced delays receiving medical supplies. Several commercial hubs reported economic slowdowns. None of these disruptions were catastrophic individually. Together, however, they formed a troubling pattern. Dependence. Entire regions had become dependent on services provided by a civilization many leaders considered politically insignificant. Emergency sessions were called. Investigations intensified. Military intelligence agencies were ordered to determine humanity's long-term intentions. What they discovered generated even greater concern. Human fleets were moving, not toward disputed borders, not toward council territory, toward human space. Across dozens of sectors, vessels were being redeployed simultaneously. Escort groups, supply convoys, industrial support ships. Defense formations. Everything flowed inward. Some officials feared mobilization for war. Others suspected preparation for economic isolation. Neither explanation fully fit the evidence. Human forces weren't gathering for attack. They were consolidating. Systematically. Deliberately. According to a classified strategic assessment, Earth appeared to be restructuring every major component of its interstellar presence.
Trade.
Industry. Transportation. Defense. Diplomacy. The process had likely been planned long before the summit. That realization terrified experienced analysts, because it meant humanity had anticipated failure. The peace talks had not changed their plans. The talks had confirmed them. Then came the report that transformed concern into panic. Long-range observation stations detected fleet movements on a scale unseen in modern history. Thousands of human vessels were repositioning across multiple sectors simultaneously. The formations stretched beyond anything intelligence agencies expected from a civilization supposedly uninterested in power projection. Council leaders stared at the data in stunned silence. For generations, they had measured humanity through speeches, negotiations, and compromises. Now they were seeing a different picture. A civilization capable of extraordinary coordination. A civilization that had spent centuries building networks no one appreciated. A civilization that had finally decided to stop carrying burdens others refused to share. And the movement had only just begun. The Galactic Council spent months preparing for a confrontation that never came. Military strategists studied fleet movements around the clock. Defense ministries raised readiness levels. Border monitoring stations expanded surveillance operations. Every major power expected humanity's withdrawal to end with aggression. The data told a different story. Human fleets weren't moving toward Council worlds. They weren't concentrating near disputed territories. They weren't establishing invasion corridors. Instead, every deployment followed the same pattern. Protection. Human vessels positioned themselves along transportation routes linking human systems. Defensive platforms appeared near strategic infrastructure. Supply convoys reinforced industrial centers. Long-range patrol groups secured regions previously vulnerable to disruption. Humanity wasn't preparing to conquer anyone. Humanity was ensuring nobody could disrupt what came next. That realization forced analysts to reconsider their assumptions. For centuries, many governments had viewed military strength as the ultimate measure of power. Yet Earth appeared focused on something else entirely. Stability. Within a year of leaving the negotiations, humanity announced the creation of an independent interstellar economic framework. The initiative connected human worlds through dedicated trade corridors operating outside traditional council oversight. New shipping routes opened. New infrastructure projects began. New commercial agreements appeared across regions previously neglected by major powers. The speed was astonishing. Entire transportation networks became operational within months. Industrial hubs expanded rapidly. Resource exchanges that would normally require years of bureaucratic approval started functioning almost immediately. The explanation soon became obvious. Humans had been building the foundation long before leaving the summit. What appeared sudden to outsiders was actually the result of decades of preparation. Then something unexpected happened. Smaller civilizations began contacting Earth. Many of these species had spent years struggling to gain meaningful representation within council politics. Their concerns were frequently ignored in favor of larger powers. Now, they saw an alternative. One by one, governments requested trade partnerships. Others sought infrastructure agreements. Some simply asked for access to the new transportation network. Humanity reviewed each request individually. No species was rejected based on size, wealth, military capability, or political influence. The only requirement was straightforward: mutual cooperation. The response was immediate. Worlds that had spent generations competing for council attention suddenly found willing partners. Agricultural systems gained access to broader markets. Industrial colonies received investment. Remote settlements acquired transportation links previously considered and profitable. Opportunities expanded rapidly. Meanwhile, conditions inside council territory continued deteriorating. Supply shortages became more frequent. Shipping delays increased. Major infrastructure projects remained unfinished due to logistical bottlenecks. Governments that once dismissed human contributions now struggled to replace them. The problem wasn't technology. Many civilizations possessed advanced technology. The problem was coordination. Humans had spent centuries connecting systems, industries, and populations across vast distances. Replacing that network required trust, experience, and cooperation. None could be manufactured overnight. Economic reports grew increasingly alarming. Several influential powers experienced measurable declines in trade activity. Commercial confidence weakened. Investment slowed. Entire sectors entered prolonged uncertainty. Council leaders attempted emergency reforms, but every solution encountered the same obstacle. They were trying to rebuild structures they had never fully understood. Then humanity released a public statement. The message spread across known space within hours. Its contents were remarkably brief. Peace is not surrender. Cooperation is not dependence. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. There were no threats, no accusations, no declarations of superiority. Yet the statement hit harder than any military ultimatum, because everyone knew exactly who it was addressing. Public reaction was immediate. Across hundreds of worlds, citizens began questioning narratives that had dominated galactic politics for generations. People examined historical records, trade data, relief mission archives, infrastructure reports. The more they investigated, the clearer the picture became. Humanity had never occupied a position of weakness. Humanity had chosen restraint. There was a difference, a profound one. For centuries, humans possessed the ability to leverage their influence more aggressively. They simply refused to do so. The realization spread through political circles like wildfire. Leaders who once viewed human patience as evidence of dependence now recognized it as a conscious decision. Earth had spent generations prioritizing cooperation over advantage. When that cooperation was repeatedly exploited, humanity had not retaliated. Humanity had simply stopped offering what others failed to value. The consequences became impossible to ignore. Several independent governments openly criticized the Council's handling of relations with Earth. Others demanded structural reforms. Some abandoned neutrality altogether. Then came the development that shook galactic politics to its core. A coalition of more than 40 civilizations announced their withdrawal from Council authority. The declaration stunned observers. Many of the departing members were not traditional allies of humanity. Some had little direct contact with Earth at all. Their reasoning was simple. They believed the future lay with a system built on partnership rather than hierarchy. Within days, representatives from those governments entered negotiations with human officials. The balance of power across known space shifted dramatically. For the first time in centuries, the Council faced a threat it could neither intimidate nor legislate away. Not an enemy, not a rebellion, a choice. And an increasing number of civilizations were choosing humanity. Continuing directly from Section 4. The crisis facing the Galactic Council was no longer economic. It was existential. For generations, the institution had presented itself as the center of civilized space. Membership was considered essential. Its authority was viewed as permanent. Its leaders believed the structure they governed would endure indefinitely. Now that certainty was disappearing. Every month brought additional departures. Not dramatic exits accompanied by protests or accusations. Quiet withdrawals. Governments simply concluded that their interests were better served elsewhere. The trend alarmed even species that remained loyal to the Council. Questions spread through political circles. How had the situation deteriorated so quickly? Why had so many civilizations lost confidence? Most importantly, why had nobody recognized the danger before humanity walked away? Determined to find answers, several member governments authorized a comprehensive historical review. Independent investigators examined centuries of diplomatic records, voting histories, economic agreements, and council proceedings. What they uncovered proved deeply embarrassing. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. Human recommendations delayed. Human concerns dismissed. Human initiatives obstructed. human contributions minimized. In many cases, policies that later became essential for galactic stability had originally been proposed by Earth. Those proposals had often been ignored until crises forced their adoption years later. The evidence was impossible to dispute. Humanity had not been a troublesome member challenging the system. Humanity had been holding portions of that system together. The deeper researchers dug, the worse the picture became. Archived communications revealed countless examples of human diplomats warning about emerging threats long before they became emergencies. Trade vulnerabilities, infrastructure weaknesses, regional instability, resource shortages. Their predictions had frequently proven accurate. Yet warnings from Earth rarely received the attention they deserved. Powerful governments assumed solutions would always exist when problems finally became unavoidable. More often than not, humans created those solutions. Another review focused on humanitarian operations. The findings stunned even experienced officials. When disasters struck remote colonies, human relief missions routinely arrived regardless of political affiliation. Allies received assistance. Neutral worlds received assistance. Even governments openly hostile toward Earth received assistance. Records showed numerous situations where human resources had saved populations belonging to civilizations that later opposed human interests in council debates. The pattern repeated throughout centuries of documented history. Humans helped because people needed help, not because cooperation guaranteed rewards. For many leaders, that realization was profoundly uncomfortable. They had spent years assuming humanity acted from strategic self-interest. Now, evidence suggested something different. Humans genuinely believed cooperation was worthwhile. The Council had mistaken that belief for weakness. Public opinion shifted rapidly once investigative reports became available. Citizens across countless worlds began discussing historical events through a different lens. Stories once considered routine suddenly carried new meaning. The mining colony rebuilt after a catastrophic reactor failure. The trade war peacefully resolved through mediation. The refugee populations relocated after regional conflicts. The anti-piracy networks protecting vulnerable shipping routes. Human fingerprints appeared everywhere. Not because Earth sought control, because somebody needed to do the work. A growing number of political leaders reached the same conclusion. Human kindness had hidden the true extent of human influence. People notice power when it arrives with fleets and demands. They rarely notice power when it arrives with engineers, cargo ships, and solutions. Earth had mastered a form of influence many civilizations never understood: reliability. And once reliability disappeared, everyone finally recognized its value. Within the Council, blame became unavoidable. Committees launched investigations into decades of decision-making. Former officials were questioned. Voting records scrutinized. Policy failures dissected. The conclusions were remarkably consistent. The crisis had not been created by humanity's departure. The crisis had been created by centuries of taking humanity for granted. That realization left only one possible course of action. The Council needed dialogue. Not resolutions. Not sanctions. Not negotiations conducted through intermediaries. Direct dialogue. A delegation was assembled from several major civilizations. Carefully selected representatives traveled to Earth carrying a simple objective: repair the relationship before permanent damage occurred. The journey itself reflected how dramatically circumstances had changed. Not long ago, human leaders routinely traveled to council chambers, seeking cooperation. Now, the council was traveling to Earth. Upon arrival, the delegates expected to encounter a civilization celebrating its newfound influence. Instead, they found something else. Human systems were thriving. Trade flowed efficiently. Infrastructure expanded continuously. Research initiatives advanced. New partnerships emerged across multiple sectors. There was no atmosphere of triumph. No rhetoric about victory. No campaigns humiliating former rivals. Humanity wasn't focused on the council at all. Humanity was focused on building. That realization struck several delegates harder than any accusation could have. Earth had moved forward. The council was the one looking backward. Eventually, the delegation received permission to open formal discussions. The invitation was brief, professional, respectful. Nothing in the message revealed whether humanity intended reconciliation, continued separation, or something entirely different. As preparations began, anticipation spread throughout known space. Governments monitored every development. Markets reacted to every rumor. Entire populations waited for news. The meeting represented more than diplomacy. It represented a question. Had the galaxy realized its mistake too late? Or was there still a chance to rebuild the trust that had taken centuries to earn and only moments to lose? The answer awaited them on Earth.